Hey everyone, I'm Michael, president of UAB's SNMA chapter, and I'm here doing a personal statement workshop. And seeing the disclaimers at the bottom, I wanted to be clear that we're not representing the Office of Admissions and Enrollment Management, as well as every essay and supplemental essay shown here is purely for an example, not to be plagiarized. So a little bit about me. I'm from Birmingham. I grew up in the area, went to Birmingham City Schools through 8th grade, and went to high school at Shays Valley in the IB program, as well as in UAB for undergrad, majoring in psychology with a focus in liberal arts. And some three involvements that are really relevant to this that I'm going to bring up is being on UAB's ethics bowl team throughout college, as well as being a Clinton scholar, studying in Dubai for a couple months, and my senior year of college being a intern reporter and writer with WBHM, Birmingham's NPR affiliate, and currently at the UAB School of Medicine in the MD MPH program, mostly online. So personal statements, a big emphasis on the combination of exposition and persuasion, with this being overall communicating who you are and importantly emphasizing why medicine, why you should be in the medical school, and that persuasive aspect of it. And getting into the overall outline of what we're going to hit. We're going to hit the message, overall arc of the narrative you're trying to communicate, as well as this personal statement versus a resume, and being sure that they aren't the same, and communicating something deeper than whatever will be seen in a resume or on AMCAS. And the asterisks, this is for things that are just my personal commentary, things that I think are important. And whenever we get to one of those, is take it or leave it. Is nothing is concrete. And really, this whole presentation is a lot of generalizations from my experience in writing and seeing personal statements. And finally, hitting the structure and the importance of being concise in your personal statement. Resources that I'll include with this recording is going to be a document, a scan of some pages from a book called Essays That Will Get You into Medical School. These are good essays from people who've gotten into Harvard, Mayo Clinic, other big medical schools, and evaluations from the admissions committee. So you can see critically what admissions committees thought of these good essays. And a book that the UAB School of Medicine, their admission office sent me these last two, this book and a worksheet that they emphasize potential applicants using. So exposition and persuasion when it comes to a personal statement. On the exposition side, really who you are, describing, conveying that message of who you are, what you're about, what motivates you, the big question, why medicine? And the lessons that you've learned to get you to that point and all come into why you're pursuing this. And that is something that's deeper than whatever could have been described in the application, as far as resumes and things leading up to this personal statement that's your own words. And the persuasive aspect of it when it comes to why you specifically, why do you matter? Why does your perspective matter? How do you stand out? Not in the sense of excelling beyond or standing above anyone, but why are you unique and standing out as who you are? Because the academic aspect of MCAT scores, GPA, if you're someone that has an MCAT and a GPA that is qualified and within means of what they consider, that is good enough to where in your personal statement, you don't have to emphasize or de-emphasize academics at all. I don't think I really hit academics specifically in mind. And that's something that you can take or leave with that. So the overall message and the story of who you are, the identity, and the thing central to all of your experiences is you. And figuring out within that, within your experiences in the past 4 or 5 years that you're going to include in this personal statement, what is the big thing you want to communicate? And this is where I get to a lot of my feelings on a theme. And for me, that was big in not only seeing how I wrote my personal statement, but in all conversations, be it in interviews, in just casual conversations about why I'm pursuing medicine. And the difference between themes and motifs is something that's big. And a lot of people can get those confused, where a theme is something more abstract, kind of a moral or overall lesson or something you want to learn, versus a motif being something that's repeated and something that's done. And you can learn things through those, but that isn't the overall big picture, if that makes sense. For example, you can build compassion through traveling, research, through doing work in specific communities, and that action repeated of traveling, doing volunteer things, doing mission work can get to the overall big idea of the theme of compassion and you communicating your personal statement. And for me specifically, I hit on empathy. That was a big thing for me, being able to connect with people, being able to relate, and the idea of exploring otherness as far as medical and non-medical, the overall differences between people, between experiences, and how can that all relate to the overall human experience. And this is something you could look in your resume and see overall what's the uniting thing between your experiences. So the question, where to begin? And this is really up to you to have something loosely in mind. Some people can have really structured outlines. People can just have an idea. That's just how you plan and what you feel is the best as far as making sure something has structure, but not being too formulaic with it, if that makes sense. So an example of some approaches is to start at the end. Some people do that, where they think about what is the big takeaway you want from it, what's the overall impression or big thing that's communicated about me as an applicant. The middle, kind of what's the high points, what are the big moments that you want to hit. That's something, an approach where someone can start, as well as starting at the beginning, starting strong. And that is something that's really hard and something that a lot of people can struggle with, seeing how they want to begin. We have so many different experiences, so many different experiences, ideas, lessons learned, personal growth that you want to communicate, and seeing how to get into that and how to transition through that. So some examples of ways people could start is saying an overview, a thesis, an anecdote, and focusing specifically on an anecdote. That's my personal recommendation, where an anecdote is something that can communicate a moment and put you at an experience or something specific, but that is relative to everything that you're about to say. And that's something as a reader can pique interest really fast versus every other medical school essay starting off with, I want to do medicine because X, Y, and Z. I want to do this. Medicine is about this. Being sure not to sound generic. So yeah, placing a reader at the scene, showing an experience, relating it to a bigger picture, and the purpose of an anecdote being for learning, showing what you learned, showing how you grew through it, versus just being dramatic in a scene, saying, I saw someone die shadowing the ER, versus this is what I learned through this experience. This is what happened, and this is how this pushed me towards medicine. And the big question with that, make sure it's not dramatic, is how you close it and transition into the overall personal statement, the body of the personal statement. That can be in the form of a thesis or just something more smooth and not really sticking with a certain formula with that. Because overall, it can be a conversation, a personal statement, and a conversation between you and whoever's reading it in the admissions committee, and they have an idea of what the conversation would be like if they were to see you in person with an interview, versus reading a personal statement and saying, this is what your resume says. So the best way for me to communicate this is probably just to show it. So this is the opening to my personal statement that I submitted. And yeah, I think flaws and all. So let's read it. Relapse? Are you saying I could have another seizure? This question was asked fearfully to a neurologist I was shadowing by a patient who had been able to control their epilepsy for nearly 5 years. Recently, the side effects of his medication, mainly fatigue, made him seek to be removed from the treatment. Even 5 years removed from his last seizure, there's no guarantee that seizures will remain controlled once off medication. A single father, the patient could not risk having a seizure and being left unable to drive to work, but also could not bear to work constantly exhausted. I sat and watched this man struggle to decide whether the slightest risk was worth being unable to drive for 6 months. This scene was my first glimpse into the realities of medicine, as I had never truly understood the tough choices physicians and patients make in seeking the best care. So with this anecdote, it's really just a moment, a 10, 20-minute conversation. But through that, you're seeing how me observing this man, what he's dealing with, you being able to see his thinking and trying to weigh what should I choose? Should I choose to be at work constantly exhausted or get rid of the side effect with the however minute of a chance of seizures coming back, it's still being there, and how that would affect my family if I were to have a seizure and not be able to drive. And with the transition and closing the anecdote, I say in the final sentence of the paragraph, the scene relates as a first glimpse into the realities of medicine and me not understanding this and what this taught me through it. And then starting the following paragraph with my time at UAB marked by personal growth and my ability to connect and empathize with people from various backgrounds. Not quite a thesis explicitly, but still that opening line to that paragraph, transitioning from that to where I'm going and seeing that with the body. Paragraphs. And this is another example. You can pause and read this. I'm not gonna spend too much time on it. This is someone who had me look over her personal statement, and she took a different approach, but it still is a great anecdote where she is more the focus of it versus with mine, I was kind of a fly on the wall looking and learning from it. But hers is more personal, it relates to family, and seeing this with her being from India and seeing the state of healthcare and that relating to an overall message of what her personal statement is about. So you can pause and read this. So the middle, getting into your body paragraphs, hitting the high points, really the big moments that are gonna create this statement and making sure that these moments are different from whatever you put on a resume and getting that deeper meaning. For example, I show, this is my senior year of college resume, talking about a fellowship I did, I think summer before my junior year. Then just, bullet points, presentation. And then when I get to my personal statement, this is how I communicated the same thing, where I showed that this summer was a defining moment for me in seeing a variety of healthcare interactions, being able to see HIV patients in their visits, the struggles they faced, seeing how this could be frustrating, and then talking about the research aspect when added to this clinical experience, and really looking at the research and the data of how the stigma overall associated with HIV led up to people not wanting to come to follow-up appointments, and how that affected them not only in a healthcare sense, but interpersonally. And then just relating to the struggles of life, and in the end, relating this to just humanizing not only HIV, the illness, but tackling this in a bigger sense of this idea of otherness as a motif that was mentioned earlier. And then finally, mention of undergrad involvements. So this was something I say you could take or leave, where the idea of emphasizing or making sure it's pronounced on what's unique, what makes you stand out, what is something different about you and what you bring to the table. This is personal, this is really dependent on you, your experiences, and this is a chance for you to relate your personal experiences outside of medicine still to the overall big picture that relates to medicine, if that makes sense, where you have family, life, interests, hobbies that aren't explicitly medical, but the significance that they have in your life, the lessons learned from them, the overall values you can take from them relates to the same values you're applying to medicine. And having a big picture is something that you can have and relate everything to the big picture. So when you relate medicine to it, it makes sense. And this is something I show in this paragraph where I talk about being from Birmingham, getting a new perspective on a place I grew up in, where I have these community involvements, being a community engagement director for student government, doing charity work with a campaign I was on, writing with NPR for the local area, doing community outreach. And then when I'm outside of Birmingham, that time in Dubai, I was living there, still studying the people, studying religion, studying the world, and overall growing in empathy and seeing this and these values of empathy exemplified during medical experiences and medical fellowship. and bridging that gap the same way in community outreach and all these other experiences, getting to that big picture idea. So even though looking at this paragraph, nothing is really medical in it, it still makes sense in the context of why I'm doing this. So structure. Structure is something that can be big to see how you want to flow, where do you want to start, where do you want to go, and it's really just seeing how you want to do that, the best way you feel you can communicate your message. That could be chronologically from this what I did freshman year through currently when you're applying, and this could be something where you could take really any perspective you want. And the big thing is not having it feel forced, where you're getting from point A to point B and onwards, but still it feels like it's a sharp jump between that and not smooth transition. Especially when you get to your conclusion, where when you want to wrap things up, you want to make sure that the penultimate paragraph, the second last paragraph, is something that makes sense in transitioning to a conclusion. For me, this was something where I had my opening anecdote that I showed earlier, then transitioned into a paragraph on personal growth throughout my undergraduate time, and then going on through that paragraph I was showing earlier, and then getting to more medical stuff. So starting anecdote, then big picture about me, who I am, my values, my character, all this growth, and then showing that growth applied to medicine. Let me pull this up. So I'm just going to kind of skim through this right quick. This was the anecdote we showed earlier. My time at UAB marked by personal growth, this first sentence. And then looking at the last sentence, that paragraph, transitioning to these principles shaping my character beyond UAB. And so I'm leaving explicitly college stuff and getting to more community stuff, where these experiences, the same paragraph shown earlier, community engagement, things like that, going to a different country, and then further transitioning to some medical experiences, not as clinical, but still medical experiences in the context of an undergrad medical program I was in, and seeing some of the lessons, the texts, not academic in the sense of grades, but academic in the sense of what I was learning and how what I was learning was relating with what I wanted to do. And looking through this, talking about some books, some good books from a narrative medicine and more humanistic medicine perspective, and exploring this patient-physician relationship leading to a fellowship that bridged research and the community, seeing something I've already spoke on with my community involvements, getting into a more clinical research medical side, and seeing with the overall flow how this paragraph can bridge from talking about community engagement, NPR, to now we're in 1917 clinic, HIV clinic, seeing these patients and seeing how that all makes sense. And whatever you do, making sure that your story can flow from that easily. So this was a paragraph we already showed. And now we're at a conclusion, which really isn't that long, and it doesn't have to be. Seeing medicine represents the understanding beyond simply treating symptoms, empathy, confronting the realities of people's circumstances, undergrad experience shaping this, instilling these values and these qualities to breed outstanding physicians. And looking at this conclusion, everything that's said in the overall message of it is something that's been communicated already. But this is more so as putting a button on the conversation. And this conversation is coming to a natural close, where you see this conclusion, and even as this conclusion wasn't there, looking at this paragraph we talked about earlier, with how this ends and the most explicit medical stuff, stigma, people humanizing HIV, the idea of otherness, and explored throughout nearly all of my undergrad involvements, that if I ended the entire statement there, it wouldn't be super awkward. It wouldn't be super weird if I ended this whole thing right there. And you being able to communicate points and really build a narrative throughout the body. So once you're at the conclusion, there isn't a lot of pressure for you to make big points there, because the big points have already been made. And especially with the character limit that you have for AMCAS and a lot of essays, it's not really the time to be making a lot of grandiose points at the end where you can make them throughout the body. So at the end, it's really just a time to reflect on that. And that can save a lot of space as far as characters. Let's see. So yes, conclusion, a lot of what I mentioned earlier, getting back to the big picture, not really having to restate specifics, because everything that was mentioned here, talking about undergrad experiences, realities of people's circumstances, empathy, all of these things are things that have already been covered extensively. So it's no need to hit, this experience showed me this experience showed me this, because we've already been through that. The idea of universal truth, if anyone's ever told you about that, as far as in literature or in essays where you're relating it to something bigger than what you're talking about, that's something where you can take it or leave it, especially in the context of medicine, where it's not really universal truth about life, but probably more about medicine in that sense, if you want to do that. And then going after you finish the draft, going back, reviewing it, making sure that, as well as having details, being concise, and weighing, is a detail or something that maybe has you over a character limit worth it or not? What does this contribute? Is this substantive? And seeing you would rather be over than under as far as with character limits, word limits, to put more in and have a big picture than cut down, rather than shoot to not meet the mark and then missing it by a lot and then having to add a lot of fluff that really isn't substantive to make a goal. And that's something where you could have something that is, even though it's a character limit is met, the overall substance and quality of it doesn't match up. And I'll finish with beware of too many cooks in the kitchen, because when you finish a draft, when you edit it, you probably will want another perspective other than yourself to come and review this, but being mindful of where that goes, in a sense of, if you have a college counselor, a pre-health advisor, a physician that you shadow, your mom, your dad, your best friend, if all these people were to review your personal statement, all of them would have something different that, as far as feedback. And then seeing that, and if you were to try to still make adjustments based off of all of that, something that was your message, something you want to communicate, can turn into what people want to communicate for you. And being mindful of whoever you choose to trust with this, that is someone that you prioritize their opinion, their feedback. And it's not just anyone in a sense, because you can end up having a solid idea or solid statement that needed a few adjustments, turning to everyone having input in it. And now it's transformed into something that truly isn't yours. And that can lead to coming off as ingenuine, or a message not being as genuine as it would be if it was just you and less perspectives. But that is enough of me talking. I hope this was a good lesson, and I hope this overall was something that can be helpful. So I don't think I didn't include any contact information, but if anyone wants to get in touch or has any follow-up questions, you can email UABSOM@snma.org. And my email is mliptrot@uab.edu. Yeah. So thank you everyone for your time, and I hope that the pandemic can pass so SNMA and MAPS can get together, and the mentors and everyone can just be able to have a better fellowship than electronically.